Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Mansell Show. As always, I'm your host, Brian Mansell. I'm an independent sports media member who has been part of the sports industry now for a few years, and I've got a podcast or vodcast, whatever you want to call it. To me, this is a podcast dedicated to anything and everything that has to do with the great sport of American football. Now, we cover everything here, from the NFL to the UFL to the CFL to college, high school, even the games you're hosting in your backyard. We cover it all. Now, this isn't just for your diehard fans or your analytical nerds. This is also for the average fan who's new to the game or wants to learn more about it or is just trying to understand more about their team. This can be for everyone. This show is for everyone. The Brian Mansell Show. Now, I know it's been a while. It's been about a week since we had our last episode, but we're actually making our first appearance on YouTube on this episode, so shout out to the YouTube crowd. We're going to be also on Spotify Live. It's no longer a Spotify exclusive. You can watch it on both channels. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio, saying hello to my peeps out there as well. Today, we got a lot to talk about. Opening drive, we got to talk about a couple retirements and the signing of a backup quarterback who apparently wasn't supposed to be in the NFL. We told last time he was going to go to the CFL, but apparently that's no longer happening. After that, we're going to go into the UFL. We have been yet to talk about the other leagues yet outside of the Canadian Football League. So we're going to be going now into the United Football League, who just started their spring football season. We'll be going through everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks. From there, we got a couple things to also discuss, some things I've seen around on social media. So first thing we'll talk about is it worth drafting a wide receiver in the first round? There's a report that came out from an analyst for the draft who said, if you're getting to the late parts of the first round, maybe it's not worth taking a receiver that high and you should wait until later because the quality of receiver drops drastically towards the mid part of the first round. Now, I tend to have an opinion on that statement, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. Now, we also are going to talk about what the first round of the draft looks like right now, because it's a little bit undetermined. Some things going on with the Giants and a couple other teams that kind of makes it a little unpredictable right now. So I'm going to give my best crack at it and do a full one-round mock controlling all 32 teams for the first time on this show. So this way you guys get a good feel of what's going on and what it kind of looks like in my eyes. And then finally, we have a fact or fiction segment for the first time in probably about a month. For the fact or fiction segment, we're going to talk about the New York Jets. The recent story came out about involving Aaron Glenn and what they're going to do with the running back room this year. And it's led to some comments on social media about what's going to happen with Breece Hall. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. So, without further ado, let's get right into the opening drive. Now, as we get into the opening drive here, I want to remind you guys to make sure you like and subscribe to the show, and make sure you share this out to all your friends, because this is the way we're going to grow here. This is going to get big down the line, and I promise you, you don't want to miss out on this ride from the very beginning. Now, as we do the opening drive, our first story we're going to talk about is two major retirements that happened over the past weekend. First off, Terron Armstead, the longtime tackle who played for the Saints and Dolphins in his career after 12 seasons, is calling it a career. He's going to go ahead and join the sports media industry at this point, which is a great venture for him to go into, because a lot of former players, I always encourage you to go into sports media, especially if you have a lot of good knowledge on the game you can share with people. Make the jump. It's a lot of fun, and the fans always love hearing more about the game in ways that maybe they don't understand it. They get to see a new perspective from a different player. So for Armstead, it's a very good path. But he leaves behind a multi-time Pro Bowl career and also an All-Pro nomination. He was considered one of the best tackles of the 2010s, and I can guarantee you Saints fans are going to be really sad that he's gone, and I'm sure the Dolphins fans are too. And this leaves questions for the Dolphins now in terms of protection, which we've mentioned in a previous episode. Miami's offensive line needs a complete revamp, and losing Terron Armstead is going to make that a lot harder for Miami to accomplish that. This is just going to raise the priority for them to have to reassess the line and address it in the draft, because free agency is going to start dwindling down and there's going to be less options to take for guys who could potentially start. So if you're the Dolphins, now would be a good time to start upping on the top 30 visits and the draft scouting in order to figure out what your future is there for protecting Tua Tagovailoa. So that's that. And again, congratulations to Terron Armstead. Long career, very successful. He made his money. You couldn't have asked for a better career. Well recognized. Could he be a Hall of Famer? Definitely has the potential to be, but I don't know if he's going to get there. It might be end up being one of those kind of like a grandfathered in situation. You played for a long time and get in the senior committee, but I think he has a decent chance. It's not a strong case, but he has a solid case to possibly make the argument to get in. So we'll see what happens there. But the bigger retirement news, which we did not talk about, the guaranteed Hall of Famer, Julio Jones, the longtime Falcons wide receiver who also made appearances with the Titans and the Buccaneers, is now calling it a career. The multi-time All-Pro, the multi-time Pro Bowler, one of the best offensive players of the 2000s, is now retiring. When you think of the 2010s and you think of wide receivers who blew the game away and defined what it meant to be a stellar wideout, to be a game changer, to be an impact player that inspired generations, you think of three people. One of those people, unfortunately, isn't necessarily in the great headspace right now, that being Antonio Brown. The second guy is already in the Hall of Fame, and that's Calvin Johnson. And then your third guy you think of every single time is Julio Jones. Julio Jones was one of the most consistent wide receivers of the 2010s and one of the most memorable by far during his time in Atlanta with Matt Ryan. If it wasn't for him, Atlanta wouldn't have reached the pinnacle of success to make a Super Bowl appearance at Super Bowl 51 back in 2016. Now, he's going to call it a career. After a few years of, winding down and, teams kind of not making a priority of him, now he gets to take a step aside and finally focus on the more important things in his life. And all he can say is, I cannot wait for your induction ceremony in about 5 years from now. And as someone who is a Buccaneers fan, who grew up watching and having to deal with Julio Jones on a week-to-week basis, as much as he was a nightmare for our defenses, he was constantly one of the best people on the field, one of the nicest people. And I mean that wholeheartedly. You listen to the interviews, you listen to post-game pressers, you see what he's done for the communities in Atlanta. He was beloved by everyone. And I know for a fact that Julio is going to be really upset now that he's retired and he can't really go on the field no more. But trust me, it's going to be a whole lot sweeter when he's in Canton in 5 years. It will be a whole lot sweeter. So congratulations, Julio. Congratulations, Tehran. We are really happy for you guys, and we can't wait to watch what you guys do in your post-retirement career. And that's going to do it for the opening drive after this one other piece of news. Cowboys released a bunch of quarterbacks. We talked about they had to reconfigure the room. They did trade for Joe Milton, so now they have a new backup. They got him from New England. But the weird twist in all of this is where Trey Lance is going. Trey Lance was released by the Cowboys. They had no QBs in the room. Trey Lance was getting offers to go play in Saskatchewan in the Canadian Football League, and now he has decided on a team. He's taking a one-year deal to become a starter for... Not a starter, my apologies. He's taking a one-year deal to become a backup for Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this is really interesting because I've done a deep dive on Trey Lance before. I looked at his career through a microscope because I felt that he never truly had the opportunity to become a successful starter, even though he has the talent and the tangibles to become a potential Pro Bowler. And he had that in San Francisco, but the injuries affected him, and then another quarterback came through who blew people away and took over the starting position and kind of threw Lance's career into a spiral. I still think he's got something left in the tank, and surely the Chargers do if they felt he was worth becoming a direct backup to Justin Herbert. And if there's one guy who can fix him, it's the QB guru mind of Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh has one thing that I think makes this very possible for Lance to become a starter by the following season in 2026. And that would be the fact that he's worked with quarterbacks who have a similar play style. And the quarterback that would be is Colin Kaepernick, which I know we haven't heard his name in a long time. And for half the NFL fans, they never want to hear his name again. The other half, they still want to see him get his opportunity to play in the NFL. Even though he's in his late 30s now, it's kind of going to be really hard to do that. And I think he really should consider a coaching role. I think he'd be excellent at that. And be more involved in the NFL too. But that's a whole other debate topic. I don't like getting into that talk because I really do think Kaepernick deserves another shot to be in the league. And there's a whole bunch of people who will argue with me on that. But the truth is, I think that Jim Harbaugh getting Lance is another chance for him to rebuild the quarterback. Kind of like what happened with Kaepernick. They're similar in certain ways. Lance has the mobility to move and make plays happen with his leg, and he has a good arm. The problem is Lance can't get control. So his accuracy kind of dies out, and that's a bit of a problem. So for Lance, what I would like to see is see if they can get that mobility back in him, because that would be the key for him to get better. If they can get that accuracy up, if they can get his mobility more intertwined into his game and kind of promote that better, I think he would go a lot farther in this league. And I think he would have a chance to start again. It would be really beneficial for him. But it all depends on how much playing time he gets, what he can do in practices, if he gets in-game opportunities, can he make the most and win a few games and kind of catch some eyes here? That'll be the question. Can he do kind of like what Josh Dobbs did? Josh Dobbs got thrown into a starting role, won a couple games, showed some flashes of prominence, and got himself a better deal to be somewhere else, and was able to start a little bit and also be that potential backup for a couple years. It kept him in the league for a longer amount of time, and he's still in the league now. So I think a similar thing could happen here with Trey Lance. But it all depends on what Harbaugh does with him. If the Chargers do right by him, I definitely see it happening. I could say that much. But only time will tell. And that's going to do it for the opening drive. Now that leads me into the UFL. Now, if you are a football fan and you haven't heard of the UFL, let me break it down for you. A couple years ago, two leagues merged. It was a merging of two spring football leagues, the USFL, United States Football League, and the XFL, which is the Extreme Football League. There was a merger done, a purchase made, to create a new league uniting the two of them together. The United Football League, which is head up by one of the main owners being The Rock Johnson. Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I'll just call him Dwayne because he doesn't like being called The Rock for some reason unless he's wrestling. So, Dwayne Johnson. Ownership team is very big on spring football. They want to promote the sport out to more audiences. And in the news with the UFL, it's a little shaky right now. They had a good year last year, ratings-wise and with performance. But this season so far, harsh dip. Really, the marketing's been knocking it down a bit, which kind of sucks because with the UFL, there's so much promise there and so much they can do with the league to make it a mainstay for fans. The UFL is supposed to be the biggest complaint and why spring football became a thing is because football fans hated the fact that we have to wait so long for the NFL to come back. The spring football league is the alternative. Yes, you lose the NFL and you got to go a month without football. But at least in the next month and a half later, you have spring football for another 2 months, 2 to 3 months. So at least that carries you into the late end of the off season when they're getting ready for training camp. You're past the draft. These guys are getting back into training and they're preparing to go back and report to the teams. That's kind of the important thing here. And I think that's why spring football was created, was to kind of bridge that gap. It can't compete. So why not bring eyes to a product that isn't really getting much attention because nothing else can compete with it because there's nothing else like it. That is what the UFL is. And I think they're kind of straying away because they're dropping the ball in terms of how they're marketing it and keeping the eyes to the product. They're kind of losing out here. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of give you guys the update you need to hear for the UFL so that you understand the depth of how good this league is. And I'm going to try to do some breakdown videos in the future so you guys can see more of what the UFL really looks like and the gameplay and showing you the highlights and progression. It's the best way to teach football is looking at a spring football league game. That's the best way to look. So I will show you guys that in future videos, but today, let's just focus on week 2. So first off, there's been a decline in ratings. I've mentioned that there is a problem with the ratings right now. They're not getting the eyes to the product, and they got a lot of work to do to really bring it back. That's the biggest issue we have on hand right now with that situation. Now, in the UFL, you're talking about only 8 teams. And that's very limiting, and it kind of isolates people a little bit because they're like, my town's not really represented, so I got to just pick a team. Like, one of the most popular teams is the St. Louis Battlehawks because St. Louis had a football team, but then they moved to LA and they feel alone. Now, the Battlehawks are a team they're rallying around. They always get really good attendance. But the viewership is what's dropping. So here's how we're going to explain it. This year's season opener to start the year was the St. Louis Battlehawks, who I've already mentioned. Excellent team. The city loves them. They rally. They sell out games. They're great. They're up against the Houston Roughnecks. The Roughnecks aren't really getting many eyes. They're not getting much support, and it kind of showed because this year's season opener only had 690,000 viewers, which does sound like a lot, sure, but let's compare that to last year. Last year's season opener was 1.18 million. You're talking about a sharp, about 450,000 viewer drop. That's a really steep decline. That's almost 50% of your viewers gone at that point. And it kind of coincides with recent reports that have been going on. The UFL players are talking about striking and just not playing because their CBA, they don't have a CBA. They don't have a collective bargaining agreement. They feel like in ways teams are taking advantages of them. Same thing with the training regimens, everything involving what's going on with them and protecting the players. They feel like they're not protected. Their salaries aren't, their injury stuff isn't guaranteed. That they're worried also about they're not getting year-round health care. So if the season's not in, they're not getting the health care they need if they're still under contract with the team. That's a big deal. And that's a basic thing they should have if that's a job. Think about it. Even in the minor leagues, let's compare it to baseball. Minor leagues, these guys have their own collective bargaining agreement and they have their own union that helps their team, that helps protect them. So this way they're always getting coverage and they're always guaranteed to be given some kind of support, barring any kind of cuts or waivers that happen. But still, they're getting a decent pay. They have protections and healthcare and benefits during the season and also sometimes even in the off season. And for the UFL, they're looking for something like that or more. They're looking for higher salaries. If we're going to play for you, we want to get paid more because we're the only competitor out there for football. So that's a big deal. And I think there's definitely some truth to that. They need to have a CBA in place where this can all go through smoothly with no problems. Because you want to avoid strikes at all costs because it costs the league revenue. I've already mentioned the league is struggling as it is right now because they're not getting enough eyes to the product. Now, if your players decide they don't want to play because there's no contract agreement that allows these guys to get their health cares, basic protections and benefits, and increased salaries, they're not going to play and your league's going to fall apart and then everybody loses. So it's really bad situation. But now this is raising questions about the stability and the future of the league and their prospects. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but they're still playing and active now. The hope is that it doesn't end up like an AAF situation, which you guys don't remember what that was. Before COVID, there was a spring football league attempt called the Alliance of American Football. It was a very good league. I liked a lot of what I saw. It looked really entertaining, but the problem was they didn't have enough financing to keep the project going. So mid-season, the league folded. You don't want that to happen with the UFL. They cannot fold. And to avoid folding, you got to get the CBA in place. You got to agree to these regimens where the guys are going to play harder because you can see it on the field. The performances so far in field, you can see the guys are kind of lacking a little. They're not committed the same way they were before. They're a little hesitant. You can see them moving a little slower. They're not attacking the same way. Things are off. And it's because I think part of them knows they shouldn't be doing this if they're not getting guaranteed protections and also better payment. Now, the other thing is, despite all of this, somehow, despite all of this turmoil going on, there is apparently hope that they're going to improve this league. And I'll give you an example. David Dykman, the director of football operations for the UFL, he's optimistic about the future, he says. And the way he's doing that is by highlighting the fact that the league is looking to expand. I love talking football all the time, but this is something that's going to annoy me. Dykman is expecting to announce that there's going to be 2 new expansion teams for the next season. How are you going to announce that if you know your league is struggling as a whole right now to stay afloat? I don't know. But he's also said there's an advantage because they're having games televised on the major networks. They got ESPN contracts, ABC, Fox. It's keeping them alive. And it's positive steps towards the growth and stability of the league. And he's highlighting those points, which I agree with. TV rights deals are a big thing, and you make a lot of money that way. But if you're not getting access to the products, these channels are going to try to opt out of that, and you cannot let them opt out. So your product still has to stay strong for them to have a reason to stay in contracts with you. So that's the only thing that I'm like, what are you doing here? UFL's got to figure those things out for sure. So there's challenges, there's opportunities. But the main thing you guys are here for is to hear about good football play. So I'm going to highlight a few things that kind of, just so you guys understand here, what the dynamic is of the league at the moment. So there are 8 teams right now in the UFL for you guys to know of. I mentioned the St. Louis Battlehawks, but there are 7 other teams. The Arlington Renegades from Texas, the DC Defenders from Washington, D.C., the capital of the country, the San Antonio Brahmas, which is a type of bull, and that's in Texas also. Now you go, and that's in the XFL conference because they were originally XFL teams, I think the majority of them. And then you have the USFL, the Birmingham Stallions, which is based out of Alabama, the Michigan Panthers, the Houston Roughnecks, another Texas team, and then the Memphis Showboats out of Tennessee. Now, those are the 8 teams that are currently comprising the UFL as a whole. So if we were to talk about this a little bit further about these teams, here's kind of how it shakes out right now. The good teams, the Battlehawks and the Renegades, are running wild on the XFL conference. Same with the DC Defenders. They're all undefeated. 2-0 so far. The Brahmas, 0-2. They're struggling to score points. They only have 18 points scored so far through the first 2 games, and they've allowed almost 60 points, which is not a good thing. So coverage is definitely a big issue. As opposed to the Battlehawks, Renegades, and Defenders, who combined each have not allowed more than 23 points through 2 games. Nobody's allowed more than 23 in that conference. So that tells you all you really need to know. In the USFL side, it's kind of more even. Birmingham and Michigan, Birmingham being a multi-time champion, they're 1-1. Each of them are 1-1, and they're similar in the points, 4 points against category, 32-30, 38-33. They're both playing really well. Roughnecks and Showboats having a hard time here, especially the Roughnecks. They're in the similar boat as the Brahmas. Only 15 points scored in 2 games, and they've allowed 42. At least Memphis has scored a little bit more, but they've also allowed a lot of points. So that's kind of where it shakes out. But in terms of the actual quality of players and who's really showing out, who could potentially make a jump to the NFL after the season is over, could make it onto a roster for training camp, here's the names I'm kind of catching. In the quarterback category, because everybody's focused on quarterbacks, I really like Bryce Perkins. He's played very well so far up to this point. I think he plays for Michigan. He's been doing very well. He's 1-1 with them. Showed a lot of good promise with his legs, and he's been throwing well. I can say the same for Jordan Ta'amu, who I believe is quarterbacking for the DC Defenders. And then also Manny Wilkins. He is a true dual threat. You literally have to worry about him running, and you have to worry about him throwing. He's doing very well in both categories, and he's throwing for St. Louis. So really, when you look at everything combined, they're just really playing good football, all 3 quarterbacks. Some guys to keep an eye on who could potentially make it as a practice squad quarterback or even a 3rd string. Those guys are playing well above what was expected. Then they even go to the running backs. There is one former NFL running back I'm going to mention here, but both running backs are from Arlington. Arlington has probably the most dangerous run game in that league right now. Nobody can compare to that kind of attack at the moment. And the 2 guys leading the way are Day Hunter and a familiar name if you're a diehard fan of the Miami Dolphins. You remember this name. Kalen Ballage. The 2 of them together are practically crushing the UFL on the ground. They're doing very well together. They're one of the few guys who have rushed for over 100 yards so far. I think they each scored a touchdown up to this point, or one of them has. So they're playing very good football, and it's part of the reason why Arlington is undefeated up to this point, because the ground game has been hard to stop. Nobody's been able to control that. So they've been really funneling through the ground, and that's a really good thing for them. So it's going to help them get back to the league in some kind of way if they continue this trend. DC, who's also undefeated, something I want to mention on why they're undefeated. They have probably the best wide receiver duo, and their names you really don't know. Ty Scott, Chris Rowland, probably the only receivers who are over 100 yards right now in this league, which is crazy because this is a big league, and it's a fairly big league for 8 teams, and there's a lot of receivers, and to think that there's only like 2 or 3 guys who are over 100 yards receiving, it's pretty much madness. So I give them a lot of credit. They're playing very well, and that's kind of what's keeping DC afloat in the passing game. Another team I want to mention, defensive side. We always look for good defense. Michigan has a ball hawk in DJ Miller. He's got 2 picks through 2 games. That's a big deal. But more impressive for me, staying on the DC topic, the defenders are on a different level right now. I mean, they have a really, really good pass rush. You compare it to other teams, they don't match up here. They don't match up here. The DC defenders pass rush has 8 sacks in 2 games. As a team, they've sacked the quarterback 8 times in the last 2 games. That's a really good number because a lot of teams in the league don't match up in those numbers. And shout-outs to Roberson and Hines III. Each of them have 2 sacks. They're heavily contributing to these numbers, but they're playing very good football. And if they continue this kind of pass rush against a team where the quarterback play can be a little shaky at times, it's going to make it for a much sweeter payoff for the defenders down the line. Real big payoff. Other guys I want to mention on the defensive side. For tackles, in terms of tackling, who's been the best so far? Despite the fact they don't have a win yet, the Memphis Showboats are doing really well. Shout out to Steel Chambers, if that name sounds familiar. He was in the league at one point. And then Zeke Vandenberg, another guy. They're leading the way with tackles for Memphis. They have been heavy in that category. Both are top 5 in tackling right now. Really impressive for them as a duo. And then the silent talker here, kicking. We've been talking about the controversy of kicking quality being poor in the NFL now. It's getting a little worse. So who are some guys who are standing out maybe in the UFL who could get a promotion? Again, the guy on Detroit who kicked last year came from the UFL the previous season. I believe that was Riley Patterson. So it's a big deal that there's guys getting called up. So if you are a social media person, you probably know this one name, Donald De La Haye, also known as Destroying, very popular YouTuber. He's a kicker in this league for San Antonio. He had a rough first game, but his second game, he was on point, but he's not my standout guy. Matt McCrane and Harrison Mevis have been the best so far. They've been kicking the long-distance kicks. They've been nailing their kicks consistently. I think one of them is 7 of 8 and the other's 4 for 4, so that's really good. And then also shout-outs to these guys who are also kicking pretty solid. Rodrigo Blankenship, also known as Specs, who used to play for the Colts. He's a big one. And then also Matt Colin, he's been kicking pretty well too. So overall, the kicking, something to keep an eye on, especially if your team's in kicker need. I'm looking at you, Baltimore, because of what's going on with Justin Tucker. I'm talking to you. Keep an eye on these kickers, please. And so I think the last player I want to mention here for this UFL discussion is Deon Cain. Deon Cain has been playing very well as a returner, probably the best returner in the league right now. He's at averaging almost 30 yards per return, which is insane, by the way. That's an insane metric. So if he's productive like that, I could see teams making a run at him, kind of like they did for Kevontae Turpin when he was coming out of the spring league football games as well. He even made it to a Pro Bowl as a returner. Can you believe that? That's what I mean by there's potential here with spring football. If you see these guys performing well, and they get picked up to a roster, and they end up making it, and they do really well, the league is another example of success. It's almost like a minor league tryout. You know what I mean? That's kind of like how spring football is being treated here with this league. It's like a tryout session. You're looking at players for the first time who didn't make it to the NFL or didn't pan out in the NFL, and did make it but didn't produce at the level they were expected, and now they get another chance here in this league. And the teams watch. These NFL teams watch to see who stands out and who's worth investing in for their team. We're doing highlight breakdowns on some of these players at some point, but trust me, the UFL still has quality play. It's just about sustaining the long-term success. And the long-term success comes from paying your players, making sure they got proper healthcare coverage and benefits through a CBA. You do that, and then your expansion plan will work, and then the viewership will come back. Also, fix your marketing. Your marketing is also killing you. Get that straightened out, and you will have much better growth. Trust me on that. And that's all I've got to say on the United Football League. So the Washington Commanders are a team that's in the back end of this draft this year. Now, I know you guys wanted me to do more of those draft profiles I've been doing for every team, but unfortunately, I cannot continue with those because of the fact that there's just not enough episodes in span to be able to cover the rest of the teams in this draft. So we're going to cut off at where we left off with Dallas and Miami. And from moving forward, we'll just look at drafts here and there for different teams when they come up, and we'll just kind of talk about it a little further. Plus, on the 23rd, we're going to have a episode coming out with a full 7-round mock. We're going to do that. We're going to have that posted and talked about. So I'll have that done on stream on Twitch the night before, and then the next day there will be an episode elaborating on that 7-round draft. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be coming up on the 22nd on Twitch, and on the 23rd, it'll be coming out as a full episode. So keep an eye out on that as well. Some elaborations, analyzing, and last-minute talks for the draft of what could happen. But the big topic here is with Washington. So story came out on Washington on their Commanders Wire and through their little commands, their little networks of fan-created, I want to say article sites. That's the best way to kind of explain it. Fan sites that are dedicated to everything that has to do with the Commanders. It's through a network like USA Today. So for that group, they usually bring in fans or people who have writing experience to generate these articles and give engaging content. So you guys can always check those out. USA Today is a bunch. Commanders Wire, Eagles Wire, Cowboys Wire, Giants Wire. It's everywhere. Every team has a wire, so make sure you check those out. Even Bucks Wire. So if you guys ever want to check those out from fellow fans and experts, check out those sites attached to that. Now, with the Commander specific situation, this is how this came up. Is it worth drafting a wide receiver in the first round? Apparently, one draft expert went on a Commanders podcast and said that it wasn't. Now, let me explain to you a little bit more about what was said. Now, this is coming from the podcast called Take Command, which is with Logan Paulson and Craig Hoffman. It was very entertaining and informative, but what was more interesting is the guy they brought in, Jeremy Green. Sportsocracy, he's a host for that, and he's also an NFL draft analyst. They were talking about things that they could target at pick number 29. So they asked him, do they think there's a wide receiver the Commanders can consider drafting that would be good value at number 29, a receiver directly? He said no. Just straightforward no. But then he was right to the point. But then he elaborated a little bit more and said, I'll go ahead and tell you, I'm just very low on this receiver class as a whole. Now, to be honest with you, I get his sentiment about being lower on it, but it's not because the top end is bad. It's the back end. When you get to the back end, there's less immediate impact guys that need a lot of work in order to keep a roster spot. So I get that belief. But with the receivers right now, I mean, to say there's no value in the first round, that's quite egregious. I mean, there are some really talented guys in this first round, and I don't get it. I don't get the sentiment there. A couple other points he brought up on the podcast. He said, I like Teddarello McMillan from Arizona, probably the top receiver in the class. He ran a 4.5, so I think he's going in the top 10. So there you go. You got one receiver who's going to go in the top 10. And I knew that. But then there is Matthew Golden, who's been getting top 30 visits from multiple teams. He said, to me, Matthew Golden's a really fast version of Stephon Diggs when he was coming out, but he won't be the all-pro that Diggs became. So he's talking he's just a faster version of him, but he won't be at that all-pro level that Diggs got to. That's a little insulting in my eyes, but I guess I understand. I got to watch more on Golden, but I do think that's just, it's rough to say that about a player and be that critical. What I hope is that he played, because if he played the game, then I understand why you said that. But that's just not something you say you don't just say that lightly. You say that with intent. Let's just put it that way. I've talked to a lot of prospects. There's stuff you guys haven't seen that I've done interviews with prospects when I was at the Senior Bowl this past year. I want to publish those interviews at some point, but they didn't come out very good. I'll see what I can do to piece it together and make it work for this podcast. But from what I saw and what I know, you just don't say that because you never know who's watching. You never know what prospect is watching, what agent is watching, and how it's going to affect your career moving forward. So I would really be careful about that. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, he was asked about him, who was also going to be a first-round guy. He said, I have a fringe first on him. I don't think he does anything well enough that he'll end up being that guy that's up at the top of the board as you're going between the first and second day. He's got nothing there. So he thinks more that Igbokwe is going to probably be more towards the day 2 than he is day 1. I don't like that. But then he says, as you get into the second round, I love Trey Harris from Ole Miss. He's a poor man's Rome Odunze. No one will convince me differently. I watched the tape and they look exactly the same. I agree with him on that. They do look the same. I just hope there's more impact on hit from him than there is than Rome had this past year in Chicago. Alec Eomanor from Stanford, very smart player. When I watch him, he knows where to settle down. Jaden Higgins, Torrey Horton, Jalen Noel, Jalen Royals, Jack Betch. It just gets really slot heavy here. These guys are all great in the slot. Would be all good in those areas. But then he also didn't mention one specific receiver. And I'm sure you guys know this receiver. He didn't mention him once in this. So these podcast crew from Take Command said, what's up with Luther Burden from Missouri? He's supposed to be a first-round pick. Why was he not listed as an option that they should consider in the first 2 rounds? He said there is character issues with Burden. He confirmed it. He said, I am not going to doubt your natural athleticism on your natural God-given ability. But what I am doubting is your role and how I am going to manufacture your touches, because you're not a good route runner. So can you develop into a natural route runner? Your attitude is kind of going to be a big deal in that, because I'm going to have to teach you something you should have learned 5 years ago. It's hard to get him the ball because he's not a big guy or a good route runner. Every time I watch Luther Burden, he goes down about 10 spots for me. That is what this guy said. And and the reason why this is a big deal is because Burden has been a very popular pick in fan drafts and in various mock drafts by experts to the Commanders late. Now, keep in mind, the Commanders are the 29th pick. So the reason why I find this specifically interesting is because I've heard similar stories about the character stuff with Burden, but here's where I kind of divert from the natural opinions of others, okay? There are guys I met who people have character questions about. I even spoke to one specifically that I've heard many people talk about, which is Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. He's supposed to be a top 30 guy, and there are people talking about he's been very negative in all of this. Like he's got an attitude problem. Can I tell you he doesn't? I mean, listen, I spoke to him firsthand. I had a problem trying to ask him a question because my question sheet disappeared on my phone. He was so nice and very patient with me. I don't see an attitude problem with him. He had to go quick, and he was very patient. And I couldn't find my question, so I just told him, have a good day, thank you for the interview. And I just asked him a quick question to end it, and he answered it, and that was it. And I told him thank you, and I shook his hand. That was it. He was very nice and very willing to wait while I was scrambling it as the media people were trying to rush him out the door. So I'm telling you firsthand, don't listen to everything you hear. When you meet these players, there's something different. You act like they put an act on, they put on a face for the media. They don't. If you're natural with them, they become themselves. That's the thing. Media members need to get more accustomed to being more open with players. Be more relatable to the players. Make them feel more comfortable. And when you can make them comfortable, they're willing to open up and you can see who they truly are. I saw truly who Nolan was just in that little interaction. Even having the patience to wait told me everything I needed to know. The guy he's a good player. He has a good head on his shoulders. Say what you want about the character concerns, I see it. I think Burden's in the similar boat here. I think he gets a bad rep from the media. The media just picks one story or something little that they heard from somebody through the grapevine, because I am telling you, I have heard stories, so many horror stories about how the media gets very violent and how they get their stories. And I don't mean violent as in like physical. I'm talking about mental violence. Here, I'm going to give you an example. I'm not listing any names, okay? This is going to be purely anonymous because I cannot put these names out there publicly. There is one reporter who is very well known in some circles in a big market. And she's very well regarded. So I'm giving you a hint of who this person resonates with. She comes from a very specific market. She went to a team facility to do interviews about 8-9 years ago, and she was looking to find an answer to a question. She wasn't getting it from the team, so she asked somebody who worked in the building. She ran into somebody and was being friendly, talked him up, trying to make him feel good, keep it casual. Never said anything was off the record, which was the first mistake this person made. That this source ended up making wrong. And she, asked him, hey, what do you think of this, that? Do you think it's going to go this way with the team? What are your thoughts? And, just kind of like casual in a way where it didn't seem like it was really interrogating or reporting. Person just gave their opinion, right? They gave their opinion about something and said, this is not a reflection of the team. This is just what I think. And that was it. This reporter then turned around the next day and published an article saying that this team was going to do this according to an anonymous source inside the building. That person ended up losing their job. This is what I mean by the horror stories I hear. I hear a lot of stories out there. And this is how the sports media manipulates stories. There are some really bad people in these buildings. Okay, you got to really watch the media because they can be very much like snakes. I've seen it in all sports, and I'm never going to mention a name because I'm never going to put myself in that situation. But I hear everything. Even this whole debacle with Ian Rappaport and Jordan Schultz. I've seen it. I've heard stories about Schultz. And I haven't heard anything bad about Ian ever in my life. Ian's the nicest guy in the world. Literally the sweetest guy. The best reporter to even work with. Schultz, I've heard stories. So I've heard a few things, and I'm going to tell you straight up. When you get into this industry, it's good to make friends. Don't make them your best friends. Don't. It'll come back to hurt. But the reason why I'm saying this is because this is an expert about this Commanders. To bring it back to Luther Burden here, why it's a big deal. I don't think he has a character problem. You hear it all the time that people are going to say there's a character problem with this guy, that guy. Okay, that's great. Can he play football? Can he be coachable? Can he be malleable? That's what matters. It doesn't matter if he had a character concern. He got in a fight he used to get into fights in high school with other kids because they used to try to grab on him and try to mess with him, and he used to fight back and defend himself. Great. The dude can stand up for himself. Makes him more of somebody I want on my team. Somebody's going to stand up. He's going to be a team leader. That's the kind of stuff I want in a player. It all depends on the coaching staff. It depends on the team. And if you think the teams aren't pushing and asking questions on this, you are very mistaken. I've heard stories of what teams will do. It can almost turn into a police type of interrogation in team interviews when they talk to players. I'm not kidding. This is a real thing. And it's sad that fans don't know more about it, but this is the truth of what I know. So in short, with this whole story with Burden, I'm not going to take this straight to heart. But to say, is it worth taking a receiver in the first round? I'm going to tell you that I think it's true. I think you can take a receiver in the first round. I think there's about 4 or 5 receivers you could take in the first round. 4 or 5. And he's mentioned a few of them. I think Egbuka could definitely be a first round receiver. I think Burden is definitely a first round receiver in the mid round. Did not even mention him in the first 2. That is just complete malarkey. I'm trying my best not to curse on here, but everything in my head is spiraling right now thinking about how angry this makes me. There's other guys. Tet McMillan, I think, is a guaranteed first round. Matthew Golden is a guaranteed first round. That's 4 guys I've named. I do also think Trey Harris could slip in a little higher, and it could happen the same thing with Jack Betch from TCU. I hear a lot of people love Betch, and it's very difficult for me to even pick a guy who I don't think is going to make it because I think there's potential for a lot of guys here. There's 4 or 5 guys I think could really be a first round pick as a wide receiver. So to say that there's no late round options, I think that is the dumbest thing I've heard today. And that's me being direct. So Jeremy, I would get some things figured out because I really do not agree with that statement from you. I really don't. But this now leads me into a bigger question. Now that this has been brought up from Washington's podcast, what does the first round look like? Well, how will it shake out? Is there any way to really return back to what the previous draft said? Because the previous drafts were listed very differently. Because I think when you look at the draft from a month ago, it's not the same as now. Because things change. Combine changes things. Team visits change things. And I have a whole list, a 16-page list of what goes on in team visits. So we're going to jump in, and here's how we're going to do this. We're going to go into the first round here, and we're going to do a full 32 pick. There's first round. We're going to do all 32 teams, just to kind of really give you a feel of what this draft looks like in its full. So we're going to enter the draft here. We're going to use PFF for this. Shout out PFF. You guys are always great with your mock drafts. I really love your premium stats. They help to really define the situation, what's happening with teams. Always a great watch and a great team to go with. They do really great work. I rely on them a lot more than you think. So now we're at the first pick here, and with the Tennessee Titans, it's kind of obvious, I think. There's been talk about them making a trade, but I think for me, it's almost obvious that it's going to be Cam Ward and nothing else. I'm the Browns. Knowing who they visited with, who's done their visits, I have a whole list courtesy of Walter Football. Shout out to them. They're doing up-to-date updates on the draft visits and everything they've done in every form with every player. So keep an eye on that list all the time. They're really good there. They've been really active on that. The Browns need a lot. Quarterback's a very prominent thing. And based off what I've heard in terms of the talks, I know there's been talk about if the Giants will actually go with Sanders at 3 and if they're really committed. But I've heard the Browns are more committed. And I think they're willing to go quarterback 1 and 2 here in order to prevent the Giants from getting a quarterback. And if that's the case, well, Giants have the whole board on their hands. And they could go with Hunter or they could go with Carter. Both guys are very good players, very talented. Giants been invested in both. Even though they haven't met with Hunter yet, they are invested. So I do think this could be a 1A, 1B situation for them. And if I'm going off what they really, really should pick, I would pick Hunter. But I'm going off what I think they're going to end up picking. It's going to be Abdul Carter. And then the Patriots. They met with a bunch of players as well. But one guy stands out above the rest because it's their biggest need. It's wide receiver. They're going with Ted McMillan, I think. Right now, it's kind of how I feel the top 4 is going to go at the moment based off rumblings and the visits. That's kind of where it's at. But it gets a little shaky here, Jaguars. Campbell is still on the board at this point. Campbell's going to go at some point in the mid towards the end of this top 10. And Hunter's, yes, on the board here. And they could use a wide receiver blend. But I don't think they go there. If they're going to go anywhere, I think they're going to end up taking Mason Graham. Because they need a D lineman. He's the only top 30 guy that's technically would still be on the board that they visited with that's actually a major need. So there's that. Raiders now. Raiders are a weird spot. I could see Jeanty going here, but it's tough to go with that pick if they haven't really met with him yet. And just a reminder, just because a team didn't meet with a player doesn't mean they won't pick that player. Remember what the Giants did with Parsons. They met with him. They kept reaffirming him they were going to pick him. They even told him on draft day, we were going to pick you when you fall to us. They ended up trading with the Cowboys. Cowboys picked him. So, let that be a memory. Now, continuing with the Raiders here. Everything on this board, right? D-line, receiver, running back, corner. I feel like this is the best spot for Travis Hunter to go. I think this is where Hunter ends up going. He ends up going to the Raiders here, which is weird because it doesn't seem like that would be the pick for that team, but in the end, that's kind of what they should do. Now, if I'm the Jets here, there's a whole debate. They want a tight end. They want a tight end so badly. And they've met with a few different players for top 30s. But I think in the end, they're going to make the pick for Will Campbell. And they're going to take a tackle. And if you're the Jets, I don't blame you. I really don't. Like, getting a tackle is very important. And O-line is the importance for keeping Justin Fields upright and comfortable. That's more the priority here. So Will Campbell being the Jet makes sense. Now I'm looking at Carolina. Wide receiver, edge, defensive back. Looking at the defensive back area, I know they've met with Will Johnson. And I know they like Jahdae Barron too. But I do think in the end it's going to be Will Johnson. And then with the Saints, they have an interest also in the corner area. But if these guys are on the board, you're seeing Jeanty, you're seeing Warren, you're seeing some D linemen here. I could see the Saints being a little weirdo, being a little weird one in this. But I think in the end, they're going to end up sticking with Jahdae Barron. And they're going to take a corner, which will take away from what the other teams need. So Chicago is going to have a pick of a running back, D-line, or safety. Jeanty's still on the board here. And based off everything I know, they're going to want to, they had a visit with him. They really like him. I know their running back room is loaded already with DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson. But I could see them going that direction. But I don't know if that's what they're going to commit to, and it's really shaky. I mean, hearing safety too. I'm hearing safety too. They like Emin Wari, but Does he end up going to the first round is the question there. And regarding everything else, on the D-line, Kenny Grant going up there, that's a no to me. That's a no. If I revisit the board for Chicago, right? They've met with Campbell, Connerly, Fairchild, Jeanty, Martin, Brashard Smith, Mason Taylor, Joe Vaughn. I don't see a world where the Chicago realistically avoids Jeanty if he's on the board. I don't think any team would let them fall to Dallas. So I'm going to say Jeanty goes to Chicago there. I don't like it, but it's probably what they're going to end up doing. The 49ers, on the clock here, a lot to like. There's a lot to like. They need O-line help drastically. They do need D-line. They do need corner. I think if you are the 49ers, you got to focus on the O-line because Purdy's got to stay upright this year. You got to make sure he's protected. And if you're going to do that, Armin Membu's the pick. Get your tackle. Done. Again, this is a mix of kind of what I think is going on, is what I'm hearing. I haven't heard much from the 49ers camp on this one. This is a real toss-up for me. So I'm going with Membu, thinking that would be the smart move for them, and they would hopefully go with that. Dallas. Running back, receiver, guard, edge. This is where the problems set in. Everything you want, for the most part, is off this board. And I think the one guy I think they would pick here is they're going to go edge. If they do go edge, they're going to take Mike Green. Mike Green going to Dallas is a nightmare. Mike Green with Micah Parsons is a nightmare matchup. And they do need edge help, so it makes total sense. Miami. Miami's a weird one. They need guard. They need tackle. They need D-line. They need corner. When you look at Miami specifically, right, the first thing that comes up with Miami is the visits. You got to look at their visits. They've met with Banks already. They've met with Booker. They've met with Etienne, Hamilton, Nash Jones. They've had a heavy focus on offensive line throughout all of this. And there's one guy I know who they really, really love. And they want to give a lot more time to him when the time comes. And that's going to be Kelvin Banks Jr. Kelvin Banks Jr. to the Miami Dolphins at 13. I think it's a very good pick for them. Colts are next. Now for the Colts, based off their tracker, Indianapolis has been looking at a few guys. But the main guys who could go first round they've looked at is Johnny Cornelius. I've heard he can go higher than people have him right now. And Emeka Egbuka, who they need a wide receiver definitely. I would say he's definitely a heavy one. Shamar Stewart, another one. Defensive end from A&M. They're going to look at them very, very hard. And if I'm being honest, they're saying this team don't need a receiver. They need a tight end. They need a guard. They need an edge. They need a linebacker. They need safety. Very defensive focused. But I'm very heavily under the impression that even though they haven't met with him yet, they would be willing to add this guy as a weapon because this team needs a tight end desperately. And that's going to be the Colts adding Tyler Warren. If he is still on the board, the Colts are taking him. And the Colts are going to take Warren at 14. I think if he's on the board, he's in their hands. And within 3 seconds, he's in their hands. Now you look at Atlanta. Atlanta's a weird one. They do need a receiver. They also need a center, and there's really not a natural center that's high up in this class. Same thing, and I think edge is probably the better bet here. Same with linebacker. And there's definitely some options for Atlanta here. When we look at Atlanta so far, who they've talked to up to this point, you see that there's a nice focus in a couple areas. They have looked in the O-line. They have looked at the linebacker spot. Based off the guys they've given a lot of focus on that could be first-round picks, they're looking at Connerly, Emin Wari. They're looking at Maxwell Hairston as a serious option. Will Johnson's off the board at this point, so he's not there. I'm going to also add to this list Malachi Starks and Shamar Stewart. Knowing all of this, because I believe they did lose their safety, their big-name safety this offseason, I think Atlanta would 100% consider going with Malachi Starks just because it gives them the little depth that they need at the spot of serious need. So I'm going to say Atlanta goes with Malachi Starks to seal the secondary. Whether you agree with that or not, based off the visits, I think that's a fit. Keep the guy from Georgia in Atlanta. It makes sense. Now we're going to Arizona at 16. Guard, D-line, corner. Who did Arizona visit with is the next question. any major names that are still on this board. Matthew Golden, Olu Oladeo, they've talked to. James Pierce being on the board, Nick Scarden. They've talked to Shamar Stewart, Prince Mellon, Jalen Walker, Mikel Williams. They've done their investment, but it looks like they heavily want to look at pressure. They want a pass rusher. And if they want a pass rusher, I think there's only one realistic spot I think this guy goes. And it's going to be James Pierce over Ezeraku. James Pierce will go to Arizona at 16. I think that's where they're going to go because they did meet with him. He did get a big visit with them, and it went well. So I think that could be a spot. If he's on the board, they take Pierce for sure. I think that's where they're at because they do need serious pressure. Cincinnati needs a lot too. Guard, D-line, linebacker among some of the big names. With the Bengals, though, they're a weird team also. I don't really know where they fit. Egbuka is a big name. He should still be on the board. Golden, Emmett Worry. They've looked at Gunnar Helm. They've looked at a couple other guys, too, that are going to be high picks. Walter Nolan being one of them. Scarden, Shamar Stewart, Mikel Williams. I mean, they've looked very heavily at this section and covered their bases. I don't know why they feel they need a receiver right now. So I'm going to pass on Egbuka and Matthew Golden. But there definitely is some needs here that are going to hit the board. And the biggest need is Walter Nolan. He's going to go right there to Cincinnati. That's where they get him. Nolan goes to the Bengals right there at 17. I think that's kind of the fit where that ends up. Now, if you are Seattle, center, guard, edge. Center, guard, edge. How do you shake out here? There's plenty of good options here to go with. You can go with Ezeraku for edge if you want. You got Mikel Williams, Shamar Stewart. These guys are still on the board. But for Seattle, it all depends on who they've spent time on, seriously invested in to becoming a Seahawk. And from this list, I don't see a single edge. They have met with almost every player they've met with has been an offensive player. Almost every one of them. The only two that weren't were Siobhan Revel and Nick Amenwari. And this is very weird. I've never seen Amenwari get this many visits. I'm a little shocked by that as I'm going through this information. So I could see a world where they go Amenwari, though. I do see it. But going this high, it doesn't feel realistic. Going off the names I see on the list, they haven't met with anybody that screams a first-round pick. Which means they're keeping their pick close to the chest, and they're going to go with the flow. They have a private board. They're going to go with the flow with what's available. And if they're smart and they go with the flow, Donovan Ezeraku ends up with the Seattle Seahawks, which leaves Tampa in a bind because they really like Ezeraku. So edge, linebacker, defensive back is now where they're at. Safety corner doesn't matter for them. Looking at Tampa, they've met with a few really good players already. That fit their needs. So Turner, Stewart, Zabel. They've talked to Slater, Scarden, Revel, Oladeo. They've talked to Demetrius Knight, Mike Green, Matthew Golden for wide receiver option. I don't see them going wide receiver, given that they really like what they got this year with Jalen McMillan, and they kept their two dogs, dog receivers. You know what I mean? Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, two monsters in the duo and in the wide receiver room, going with McMillan, who's young and going to get better over time. So I don't see that really being in their play here. I do think linebackers in play, and if they do, because they're going to need to do it eventually, because Levante David ain't getting younger. Jahad Campbell going to Bucks at 19. I'm hearing more of that becoming a theme here than anything else. Now we look at Denver at 20. Running back, receiver, center, defensive line. When we look at Denver, right, we know running back's a serious issue. That's definitely on their board of concerns. They've met with running backs. They've met with Giddens, Gordon. They've met with Blue. They've talked to Caleb Johnson. They've talked to Quinshawn Judkins. They have talked to a few guys, even Cam Scadabo and Brashard Smith. They've taken a lot of time into the running back area where they really should. And tight end's also been a concern too. Harold Fannin, Terrence Ferguson among some that they've spoken to, and Gunnar Helm. So they've really spent a lot of time looking at offense being a big need here. And if they're really smart and the guy's still on the board, they should take him. And that's either going to end up being Omarion Hampton here, or they're going to go tight end. And I think running back's the bigger need here. And if they're going to go running back, they didn't meet with him. But I think Hampton would be the pick. That's the scary part. Hampton, I think, would be the pick. What's blowing my mind is that I have Burden so low, but it makes sense. Burden hasn't really met with any teams because, like we've said, there's been a character question, hence why he's sliding on the boards. This isn't what I want to do. This is what I'm hearing. So with Denver, it's tough. They do need a receiver. Did they meet with any wide receivers is the question, too. And if they did, who did they meet with? Based off what I've read so far, they have not met with any wide receivers up to this point. It's been running backs, tight ends, defensive backs, corners, edges. They may meet with all those guys, but nobody further than that. That's what's blowing my mind here. Even met with a punter before they met with a receiver. So something weird is going on here. And I think I know what's going on. And I don't love what they're going to do. But I think they're going to go with Colston Loveland maybe. Because Loveland got a combine visit, and he's the only guy I see here that makes sense in this range that they would take. The only one I could rationalize. And if that's the case, then I don't know. I wish I could tell you guys I know for sure. But this is going to be another instinct one. Because going off instinct of what they would do, I mean, listen, if it's what I would do, I would take Kenneth Grant. Fill your D-line. Continue to build that up. Keep it going. But there's options here. And they haven't met with a receiver, so it tells me they're not going to go for a receiver right away. Despite the fact this isn't a very deep class for that. And tight end does phase out very quick. So I think they're going to look at Loveland. They're going to pick Loveland. I cannot believe I'm saying that, but they are. I think they're going to go Colston Loveland at 20. Pittsburgh's up. They need quarterbacks, right? They have the Aaron Rodgers question, still waiting to see if he'll sign the contract or if he'll retire. Well, in the meantime, I'm sure Pittsburgh's not really waiting. Pittsburgh has visited with a lot of players, and I mean a lot. With guys that are still on the board, they've met with Jackson Dart for a top 30 visit. If they don't get Rodgers, I think Dart's going here. But there's no guarantee. I think Rodgers is going to sign in Pittsburgh, but I can't guarantee that to you. I think he will, but I can't guarantee that. He could easily change his mind and retire and step away from the game. That's why I don't like these taking so long here. But if we're focusing on top 30s and what's on the board, they really like the receivers that they have here. They're looking heavily at wide receiver to go with Pickens and to go with DK Metcalf. So they could go receivers here. They are looking at running backs as well. Running back is a huge investment here. Did they meet with Hampton, though? They did not meet with Hampton. Weird little development there. They did not meet with Hampton. They've met with some guys that are on the board here. So I'm going to look at their board. I'm looking at what they've done, and I'm going to look at this board. They met with a wide receiver. That's weird for me. I don't know why they would do that. In the tackle spot, I can see Josh Simmons going here. I can see a safety going. I mean, if I'm looking here, right, at the safety spot, I heard so much about Imanwari going, but to go this high is rough, man. I think with Pittsburgh, you have to stick to what you have here with Jaylen Warren, and if you look at what Omarion Hampton has done up to this point, he's like a must-have guy. He's a must-have player. I feel like you can't miss out on this. He didn't get a visit with the team, but I think he's going to end up going right here. So Omarion Hampton's going to end up being a Pittsburgh Steeler. And again, I'm under the impression that Aaron Rodgers is going to become a Steeler this year. So I'm going to leave it at that. Chargers are up next. Receiver, tight end, D-line. They're in full control of what they want to do here. They've got all the options on the table. If I'm the Chargers, right, you got a lot of players here available that they've met with up to this point. None of them have been major, though. None of them are major to the point where like they have to take them outside of Colston Loveland and Mason Taylor. And yes, Taylor's still on the board, but to go this high is a little bit questionable. So for me, I got to kind of play this game of what's the best on the board, what would they take with the best on the board? And if I'm the Chargers, you definitely need another receiver. The question is, do you go with Egbuka or do you go with Burden? And I think in this case, they would probably go one of these three with Golden. Golden was good as a contested catch guy. What's his measurables? 6 foot, 195. He could hit there. If you go with Emeka, Emeka's very good as well, 6'1", very reliable. And then Luther Burden, who we talked about, which everybody's talking about character concerns with him. I look at him and I'm not sure. I think I'm going to end up going with Matthew Golden here. They're going to take a receiver at 22, somebody who they haven't met with, because I think they know their pick. So that's why I'm going to go with that direction. If they know their pick and he's on the board, they're taking Golden. Packers, 23. They also need a wide receiver. This would be a big hit for them, or they can go edge. They need some defensive pressure too. On Green Bay's side, what they've met with so far, who they've met with. Golden just came off the board, but they still like receivers, though. They do. They have looked at defensive end. They have met with Shamar Stewart on a top 30 and Michael Williams. Who would fit more actually as a Packer is the question. Would it be Michael Williams here, who obviously measures up very well here. Just pass rush isn't necessarily his strongest suit, but run defense, he's excellent. And then there's Shamar Stewart, who is also same story. Really good run defender. Not so good as a pass rusher, but he's much better in his true pass set. So I think in this case, they would lean toward Shamar Stewart just a little bit, and they would take Stewart right here. I think that's kind of where this would go. So Shamar Stewart would end up with the Packers here. This is why I'm saying this is a weird area, because some of these guys really should go where they are, but they're not. They're sliding down my board, and that's why it's so difficult to pick. For the Vikings, running back, defensive line, defensive back. I feel like I know where to go here. And if you are Minnesota, let's see, did they meet with him? They did not meet with him. They've been looking at running backs a little bit. They've been looking at also O-line. And they've been kind of very balanced in what they've been looking for, but nobody that kind of screams first round. So this is another instance of a team sitting there saying, maybe I don't want to go this direction and play my hand early and show out my intentions. So if that is the case, I already know where Minnesota's going here. This guy is going to fit in perfectly there. Kenneth Grant to Minnesota. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. Houston, receiver, O-line. Very straightforward. Is it Egbuka or is it Burden is the question. Have they met with both or one for Houston? Because they definitely need receiver. They met with Golden. Did they meet with any other receivers? I see Kyle Williams. They did not meet with either of those other guys. They also met with Isaiah Bond. So I don't know. This is another tight situation. If you go, I would go with Egbuka here. Very reliable to the point. I mean, he got mentioned before Burden in that report. And if that's correct, yeah, I could see them going with Emeka. So I'm going to say he goes to Houston here. So Houston gets their receiver to go into that territory. So there's that. Now you got the Rams on the clock. They need a tight end, a tackle, a linebacker, and a corner. Tight ends are pretty much off the board at this point. For the Rams, who have they met with so far? Only 3 visits. Golden, Hunter, and Stewart. Stewart got the top 30, but I think Stewart is off the board at this point. So now they don't really have an option there. So they're looking at tight end very heavily, but it's not worth taking a tight end at this point. No. Because Arroyo, Taylor, they're going to go second round. If you want tackle, Josh Simmons is on the board, who can definitely play tackle. He's coming off an injury, though, a rough injury. So he could be very good, but there's also a risk factor, of course. You look at linebackers, Jalen Walker is still on the board, and so is corners. There's no corner available to take in this immediate area. If I am LA, knowing the most important things I need, I would take a tackle. I would add Josh Simmons for now. Simmons would be my pick. I would take a tackle. Now on the Ravens, guard, edge, defensive back. Michael Williams could end up being over there. I'm already eyeballing it, thinking that that's going to be Baltimore's pick. But who have they met with? Baltimore have they met with him is the question. They met with Stewart. They did not meet with Williams. Going through the rest of it so far, Oladejo, Grant. Yeah, they're playing close to the chest too. They're not really playing their cards here. And I think if they're smart, they would take Michael Williams here and settle the edge debate. So he'll be off the board to Baltimore. Detroit gets their pick of receiver, guard, edge, and linebacker. And so far, Detroit has looked at, let's see who they have talked to. Detroit has spoken to a few other a bunch of top 30 guys. I could see Gray Zabel on the board here, and they've talked about him playing into guard. So if that is the case, Gray Zabel being a Detroit Lion makes a lot of sense. Now it's the Commanders. Running back, guard, edge, corner. That's the thing. Now you guys are kind of seeing the trend with Burden. Guys are looking around Burden because Burden didn't have a very strong year and there's been character questions, so he might slip to the second round because of that. So now it's adding up. Even though I don't think it's fair to attack the character, the production makes more sense to me to look at than that. For the Commanders, running back, interior line, edge, corner. And when you look at this board for Washington, I don't think they met with as many players as we think. Like, New Orleans went on a tear, Pittsburgh did. And when I look at Washington, they looked at a good amount too, but not at the level of these other teams. From what I can read here of guys that could be potential top 30 picks, they really liked Josh Connerly a lot. I look through the rest of this list, and I mean, everything else, I don't see anybody else really slipping into this fringe area of 1 and 2. So if I'm looking here, I do see Connerly being a real potential pick here. They really like him a lot. If Scarden's on the board, I could see them doing it, but I think Connerly going to Washington is definitely in play. And then finally, we have the last 3 picks: Buffalo, Kansas City, Philly. This is going to mix up a lot of people because they're not going to know how to feel. Buffalo probably doesn't believe they're going to have a chance at Scarden at this point, or at the linebacker Jalen Walker. But when you look at what Buffalo has, who they've talked to, have they at least given them visits and expressed interest? That is the question. Is there interest there? So as I go through the board, I'm not seeing any of these guys pop up, which means they don't think they're going to get them. Which I think is interesting because I don't see a situation where these guys really don't fall to them. If this is how it unfolds, this is the perfect scenario. Jalen Walker is like the linebacker 2 pick this year, outside of Jahad Campbell. So Jalen Walker, I think, ends up with Buffalo there. Now you're at Kansas City and you're at Philly with the last 2 picks. Kansas City needs a guard, a tackle, or a D lineman. A guard, a tackle, or a D lineman. Oh, that's tough. That is a tough selection. If I'm looking here with Kansas City, right? Is there anybody major that they talk to that would be like, oh, they're going to definitely take him? There hasn't been a player yet I can see on this board who they've spoken to who's going to be an immediate pick. Connerly would have been their pick, but Washington took him, so now they don't get him. So now they're going to be looking. This is going to end up becoming a toss-up pick. Do they reach or do they settle? Harmon is a very intriguing prospect, and I think there's a lot to like with him. I could see them going there. I don't see. Is there a guard that they can go with here? Do they take Tyler Booker maybe? No, I don't know if they take Booker. Look at tackle too. I mean, these are tough selections. And then if you look at D-line, Harmon's on the board. I think they would go D-line here. Kansas City will take Derek Harmon. And then when you get to Philly, last pick, if you really want to make the joke with Philly, Luther Burden would go to Philly. Pair him up with Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. That would be a nightmare combination right there. It would be funny, though, if he did meet with them. So we're talking about Burden. And Burden did not meet with them. I don't see his name. The rest of the board, though, there is one name that pops up that they met with for defensive end. And I don't think they need him, but it apparently is being talked about. And that would be apparently that would be Nick Scarden. And apparently they do need an edge. So if that's the case, Nick Scarden would go to Philly. And that kind of settles this mock draft in a sense. So this is kind of how we feel right now. At 1, it would be Ward. The order would go Ward, Sanders, Carter in the top 3, which I think is very realistic. McMillan to the Pats, Graham going to Jags at 5. Then Hunter falls to the Raiders at 6. He goes there. 7, Campbell goes to the Jets. Johnson goes to the Panthers at 8. Barron goes to the Saints at 9. Jeanty goes to the Bears at 10. Then Membu goes to the 49ers at 11. Green goes to the Cowboys at 12. Banks to the Dolphins at 13. Warren to the Colts at 14 because they need a tight end badly. Starks to Atlanta to keep the Georgia connection. Pierce Jr. goes to Arizona. Nolan to the Bengals, Ezaraku to the Seahawks, Jihad Campbell to the Bucks, Loveland, the tight end, to Denver, Hampton to Pittsburgh, Golden to the Chargers, Stewart to the Packers, Grant to the Vikings, Egbuka to the Texans, Simmons to the Rams, Mikel Williams to the Ravens, Gray Zabel to the Lions, Connerly to Washington, Jalen Walker to Buffalo, Harmon to the Chiefs, and then Scarden to the Eagles. I feel like this is kind of a fair way to look at it. It kind of hits most of what these teams need. Few of these players didn't visit with this team yet, but they could eventually still get picked there. It happens. It does happen in the league pretty often. So I would say just because they visited doesn't mean that's where they're going to end up. So keep an eye on that with these teams. I think that's kind of the vibe I'm getting and how the first round kind of shakes. But it's very flexible at the moment. Anything could happen there. So we just got to remember that. And that brings me to the final segment of the show to close out. It is Fact or Fiction. Now, for this final segment, I do want to talk about this in a different way because there was some news that I didn't want to see that came up in my feed, and I hate that it came up in my feed, but I'm going to show you guys anyway, just so you guys see for yourself. So, Rich Cimini, very respected Jets reporter, was out there talking to Aaron Glenn and asked about him what he wants to do, and he said it sounds like Glenn, the new head coach of the Jets, wants to shift the way they attack the run, the way they approach the run game. So now they're going to shift it to a committee role rather than have Breece Hall be the main guy. And what this does is it kind of opens the door to trading Breece if Jeanty's available at 7. So Fact or Fiction's coming up here. A lot of insight here believed by the fans that Breece Hall is not going to get traded. So I'm going to tell you guys straight up what the Fact or Fiction statement is. The statement for Fact or Fiction is Breece Hall will be traded at the draft, or by the draft. He'll be traded. So this way they can get Ashton Jeanty. I'm here to tell you right now, that is fiction. This is an assumption made by Cimini. And to even consider this as a fact is a little bit mind-blowing from the fans. I'm not going to lie to you. The keyboard warriors on X are back at it again, making assumptions. The fans, the rabid fans. Cimini said he notes that the Jets may be open to trading Breece Hall. That does not mean the Jets plan to trade Breece Hall if Jeanty is available. They said they may be open to it. That doesn't even confirm that they're open to the idea of it. He's saying they might be. But if that situation happens, there's no confirmation. There's no way saying it's a definite. And I'm telling you, if it was a definite, then I would say it's a fact. But you can't just make the assumption here. Do I think Jeanty could be a Jet? There's like a 5% chance to me. I think there's a higher chance they pass on him and go with the offensive lineman instead. You cannot, it makes no sense. I understand that Jeanty's a once-in-a-lifetime running back. But to think that you would give up your really good running back right now in Breece Hall, who's coming off, not the best year, but he's still so productive and such a hard runner. I don't know why a team would want to let go of a guy who didn't do well because the team didn't run the ball enough. We talked about this on a previous episode. The Jets did not run the ball enough. That's why the run game was not good. They didn't do enough. They didn't run enough plays. To think that he's going to end up being traded because of that's really, really messed up, in my opinion. It's really messed up. Breece Hall is a very special talent. And we as fans cannot take this assumption and turn it into this big deal. We cannot turn it into a big spectacle as if it's a fact when it's clearly indicated that it's not a fact and that it's a potential possibility. We need comprehension skills, people. We need comprehension skills. Breece Hall will not leave the Jets. Aaron Glenn is not going to trade him. If anybody's going to get Jeanty, it's anybody after them. I could see a world where the Saints do it to pair him with Kamara. I could see a world where Chicago takes him. In fact, you saw it in the mock. I said in the mock, Chicago could do it because they're just there mentally. That could happen. I could see a world where the 49ers go, well, We don't know how much more McCaffrey's got in his tank. He's not staying healthy. He's having a hard time with his conditioning. Let's just go ahead and grab Jeanty for insurance. And there's also a world where I see him being literally the workhorse back of the Dallas Cowboys. Everywhere after the Jets, I see it. I don't see it with the Jets. I don't. And I think it's very, very reckless and dumb to jump at the idea that that's going to happen. Breece Hall is staying a Jet, at least for another year. He's with them. So enjoy it. I like the idea of going committee style, even though I do think Breece is probably better off being on his own in that regard, but I'm not the coach. The Jets are trying to rebrand themselves, so I'm going to let it be. I'm going to let Aaron Glenn rock and figure it out. So, in regards to this rumor, you can certify from me that the idea that Breece Hall will be traded at the draft or by the draft is a fictional statement. That's all you need to know. That's also all we got today for the Brian Mansell Show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe and share this podcast out to your friends. Again, we will be back. Wow, I stumbled real hard. We will be back on Wednesday with a new episode. We're going to talk a little bit more then, maybe some more draft talk as well, but we're going to try and get some more interviews coming up soon for some future episodes. But for now, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you're also following all the socials. It's been scrolling the entire time down here. You can follow us on X, on Instagram, or on YouTube. We're on all those on X at BA Mansell, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, all at the Brian Mansell Show. Make sure to follow those links for any future updates involving the show and also some of my ideas and content. I'm always replying to media reporters all the time, telling them, what are you talking about, and just questioning them. So you guys can sub up for those and see that too. That's a lot of fun. Once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you again on Wednesday.